Hello and welcome to the Work Inspired podcast. I'm your host, George Lucas Pfeiffer, and on today's episode, we've got an incredibly special guest. Spencer Levy is the Global Client Strategist and Senior Economic Advisor for CBRE. Spencer is also the host of CBRE's podcast, The Weekly Take. We've been looking forward to this conversation for so long and are thrilled that Spencer's here in town in Chicago to do this interview in person. Work Inspired starts right now. Spencer, thank you for being here. I've been looking forward to this conversation for about a year. I think it's a year in the making. Love that you're in town and love that you're able to fit us in on a busy day for you. Thank you so much.
Well, it's great to be here. Chicago is one of my favorite places to visit.
So a lot of our listeners probably know who you are, but for those who don't, give us your professional story, the Cliff Notes version.
Sure. So the back of the napkin story, Spencer Levy, Global Client Strategist, Senior Economic Advisor, CBRE. I've been in the business almost 30 years in a variety of capacities as a lawyer, as a banker, capital markets and research leader, and now really a communications expert, so to speak, with respect to hosting CBRE's terrific podcast, The Weekly Take, my stage work, which I'm doing right after this podcast for Cornet, and but what I enjoy to do the most is to meet one-on-one with clients, just talk about what's going on.
So you've got this incredible resume. I was looking on the CBRE website today, and it just goes on and on and on and on. When we had our planning call, you said, I'm a labor guy. So talk about that. Talk about your background as a labor guy, and how does that kind of shape your perspective as to what you're doing right now with CBRE?
Sure. So as a labor guy, and that really comes from my undergraduate degree in the first of what will be several shameless plugs here today, to the Cornell School of Industrial and Labor Relations. I graduated in 92, and with a degree in labor relations. So I studied labor as an undergrad, and it really, I'm not saying it was dormant for many years, but it wasn't the top of mind like it is today, because I think a lot of people, when they're looking at the future of office, the future of work, it's like, oh, we've never confronted this before. I'm like, no. We've been studying labor and the office and work for hundreds of years. And a lot of the conclusions that people are reaching today, I think, are premature and maybe incorrect, because I think that while we're sitting here and we're going to talk a lot about office and office design, and it's important, I think it is a distant second to the importance of what's really going on, which is a labor dispute between management and labor, which is manifesting itself in more people wanting to do hybrid work, more people wanting to work from home. And I think that once the pendulum switches back again to there being a more management power versus labor power. And the reason why there's so much labor power today is simply because the unemployment rate is so low, that the workforce participation rate is lowering. Those factors are shifting the power into labor, which manifests itself in those ways, wage increases, things like that. And believe me, I want wage increases. I want labor happy. But this is the primary factor, in my opinion, that's driving people or keeping office occupancy lower than we would have expected.
When you talk about power, it seems like someone's on the top and someone's on the bottom. So it has a negative connotation to it. But I think the power shift to the labor market, the employees during the pandemic, it generated some good things. Flexibility, shedding some light on work-life balance, priority setting, technology adaptation. As it swings back to more of an employer, in power, we're excited because we know there's value in the workplace. I mean, that's self-serving, that's what we do, but we're excited to see that kind of level out and balance out. I'm interested, though, from your background in labor, you then went to Harvard Law. Did you know that you wanted to go into law? Did you know that you eventually wanted to end up in real estate?
I think a lot of people that go to law school as a quasi-business school.
Okay.
And that's kind of how I did it. I kind of knew I wanted to be in some form of business. And in fact, my father didn't want me to go to law school, even though he was a partner in a law firm for 40 years in New York City. And he said, well, why? And he said, I could have made more money as a broker on the other side of the table. And but he did say, if you're going to get a law degree, you got to practice for 5 years and then get out. I practiced for 5 years almost to the day. And got out and became a business person. But the law background has helped me tremendously, particularly now, given how much communications I do, not just in how I think and how I speak, It really helps me in how I write and how I analyze situations in a very logical fashion. So the law was a tremendous skill set that I use to this day. If I were to do it over again, might I get a business degree? Maybe. But the law degree was certainly a great choice that's helped me along the way.
Well, how did the door to CBRE open?
So the door to CBRE is a funny one. So I'll give you the funny side story and I'll give you the direct story. So my father, as a real estate lawyer, represented a bunch of brokerage firms. He represented this firm in New York City called Cooper Horowitz, which is a mortgage brokerage firm. And I knew the principals there. I knew the brokers there. And, they were just my dad's clients, normal guys, right? Normal people. But I think that some people, when they go into brokerage, they go, oh, these people are different. They're tough. Maybe some negative characteristics. I'm like, no, they're just like anybody else. And so I had a comfort level shifting from law and banking to brokerage that maybe some other people might not have had, right? And it's proven to be correct. It's been a great 17 plus or minus year run at CBRE. But I did have a choice when I was moving from investment banking to brokerage. I had another job offer from a big time investment bank whose name you know. And I had these two offers sitting in front of me on the table. I can go to this big-time investment bank that you know and just be another cog in the wheel, or I can be something different at this powerhouse brokerage firm. And I chose something different. I always march to my own drummer. I still, to the chagrin of a lot of people, still march to my own drummer, maybe a bit too much. But that's the choice I made. I chose to be me. And that's actually a choice that is not without risk, because it's easier is the wrong word. It is something that if you choose to be me, whoever you are, you'll be happier over the long term, but it's going to be bumpier than if you take the linear path. I could have gone into a law firm and hopefully made partner one day and done that whole thing, but I saw the life and it wasn't for me. I saw the work, it wasn't for me. And I said I needed to do something that has a broader spectrum in terms of its direct impact on deals, its creativity, things like that. I'm not saying law isn't creative. I'm not saying it isn't important for the deals. It's all those things. But I think that given the fact that I have law, I have finance, I have research, I have capital markets, and now communications, I think, I don't know that I'm maximum me, and that's a term I use a lot because I teach public speaking. You need to find maximum me, but I'm trying to find it.
And it's cool that you have the kind of the insight to look ahead and say, I don't see myself happy in this role. I mean, it's not like you haven't transformed that career within CBRE. You continue to do more things, and you've got the podcast now. But that's insight that I think is pretty inspiring. And to that effect, one of the things I've admired about you is your ability to kind of forecast, analyze, and communicate trends and things going on in commercial real estate. That's a lot of what you do on your podcast.
It's true, and but it comes from the wonky side of me, right? I mean, you're seeing the communication side of me today. I got a terrific piece of research today from an old colleague of mine, a guy named Glenn Miller, who's a professor at University of Denver. He comes out with something that's known as the cycle monitor, which is really the granddaddy of them all of some of these real estate analyses of markets. Torter Wheaton, which is the EA's predecessor at CBRE, is another one of them. But I looked at it this morning and analyzed it this morning and sent it to my teams this morning. So a lot of my forecasting, even though I do it in my own somewhat unique way of pop culture and entertaining, it's heavily research based. I'm reading everything every day to try to stay on top of the trend, and it's been particularly difficult and particularly challenging. I think if my good friend and colleague Richard Barkham, who's our global chief economist, were on this show with me right now, he'd say what he said on my show last week, that 2023 was maybe the most difficult forecasting year ever. And I had some ups and downs too. I had some presentations that did not go well, because I remember in October when the 10-year almost hit 5%, I did a presentation in California, and that was a very, very unhappy audience. Even though I gave kind of like my standard speech, it didn't go well because I didn't read the material change in the market enough. Because the 10-year, you got to understand, was hovering around 1, and then it got to 5, and these people bought their assets at 3.5 caps with 3.5% debt. What do you do when the 10-year gets to 5? I mean, a lot of these people had equity wiped out, and they were scared. And I needed to be on that pulse better, and I learned from that experience.
And I think I heard you say this last year, is that even the smartest people get it wrong. And what was certain was that there was uncertainty. And I listened to that. I mean, it's a great episode. It's your weekly take, January 1st, 2024 release. There's some great insights in there. But looking into 2024, without recapping everything that they said, what are the takeaways? I mean, 2023 was murky as far as forecasting. What does commercial real estate look like as we move into 2024?
So I want to start off with a piece of good news or bad news, depending upon your perspective, but it's a reality check. I know that most of our listeners here are in the real estate business, but so I got bad news for you listeners. You're not in the real estate business. You're in the finance and labor business because real estate is a derivative of that. It is not the thing that drives that. So we are a result of finance. We are as a result of demographics and labor. And I think 2023 proved that out because finance was everything in 2023 as the rapid rise in both the short and long end of the curve made the market largely illiquid from a debt perspective for everything except for the very best assets, multifamily. Even the best construction companies were borrowing at close to double-digit rates at low LTVs. I mean, that's unbelievable change in the market. And so new construction largely stopped in many places as a result. So fast forward now to 2024. So I first said we are in the finance business, but we started this conversation in saying we are in the labor business too. And so a couple of trends that we see happening in 24. I think the major trend, the one that matters most, is consistent dropping of the cost of debt capital. And by doing that, you're going to see more liquidity enter the market. People can start to transact again. The other thing is the shifting labor patterns. And the shifting labor patterns happen both within and outside of the major markets. And so Chicago, we're sitting here right now. I was with my team last night, right? We're sitting here in the West Loop, which is historically the best office market in Chicago. It's very large, a couple 100 million square feet, one of the largest sub-markets in the United States. But the Fulton Market, which is 3/4 of a mile from where we sit, has been the hot sub-market versus the West Loop. And it's a trend you'll see in a lot of places. And why the Fulton Market? Because it has a greater concentration of live, work, play. It's got cool restaurants. It's got cool multis. Employers have moved over there, even though it's a non-traditional office market. And you'll see that same trend in New York City. Midtown South, when I got into this business, was a sleepy little submarket. So it's maybe the number one submarket in New York City. And I can go through every market in America and give you that same trend intra-city. So I won't say I love Chicago or I love New York or anything like that. And I do, but I love submarkets within them, not the entirety of the market. So I was just in a smaller market the other day, which I think is going to point to a key trend that I think people need to watch, which was Columbus, Ohio. And I say that wearing a Michigan sweatshirt. So I'm showing love to my friends in Ohio State. So I was in Columbus the other day, and I was downtown. And there's a street there, it's called Short North. It goes from the hockey arena all the way up to The Ohio State University. It's one of the best submarkets in America because it looks just like the Fulton Market. It looks just like Wynwood in Miami. It looks just like Midtown South because it's got that confluence of live, work, play. So that's the city story, right? It's not the CBD Columbus. It's that stretch of road. But they have these areas outside of Columbus that this is where the key trend is. So there's an area out there called Dublin, which is an established submarket. But there's a new area called New Albany. And I visited New Albany and the development out there. And what they had out there was the new Intel chip plant. But pertinent to that, they had several data centers from some of the name brand tech companies. And then what do they have around that? New multifamily, new retail, new office, other uses. And so I think that when people are looking for the next opportunity, follow manufacturing a little bit more than you have in the past because it's an area that is clearly on the rise because of federal incentives. Certainly geopolitical tensions are bringing more of that back to the Americas, and I don't just say the United States of America, it's really Canada, the US, and Mexico. In fact, the number one investor in Mexican manufacturing is China, in part because they're seeing some more manufacturing leave their country. But nevertheless, I think that the key trends is you need to be much more hyper sub-market focused, not market, but sub-market focused. And secondarily, you need to be looking at where the manufacturing is going. Because most of our investors in commercial real estate don't invest in manufacturing because it's a operating business. But I'm saying invest pertinent to it, and you're going to find some great opportunities in places you might not have expected. And what's good for our listeners here today, I'm sure we have some institutional investors, I'm sure we've got some smaller investors. Look, the institutional investors are still disproportionately going to invest in the top 25 MSAs in the usual suspect areas. But for a smaller developer, some of these areas in these secondary markets, some of these areas are pertinent to manufacturing, create opportunities that the bigger firms are not going to approach.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the financial situation putting the brakes on new construction. So I know there's a couple sub-markets that were planned here in Chicago, for example, that haven't gotten off the ground for that very reason. How do you predict where the next hot sub-market's going to be? Or if you're making an investment or you're an employer that's looking to relocate their business, do you go to one that's already up and coming?
So are you like asking me in a backhanded way, are the Bears going to move to the suburbs? I mean, are you getting to the hardest question of the podcast at the beginning?
Yeah.
So the way that employers are looking at where they're going to put their office space is different today than it was 10 years ago, which is probably different than it was 20 years ago. I think that 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, people wanted to be where everybody else was. And where everybody else was the CBD, right, in these towers. Now people say, okay, well, I don't necessarily need to be where everybody else is. I need to be in the place where I'm going to attract and retain talent. And so the key shift before you get to the submarkets is how commercial real estate is decided within corporations. So the big shift that occurred in the last 20 years ago, commercial real estate was this small little line item in a corporation's balance sheet, and it was in the finance department. Right? And now you should know that commercial real estate as a percentage of total cost for a company's operations still, in most markets, is 4 or 5%. In some of the more expensive markets, it can be 8, 9%. But nevertheless, it's still a relatively small thing, and it was within the finance function. But people then realized, like, well, the world is changing, and people want to live, work, and play more of these spaces. And then it began to shift more into an HR function. Say, well, is this building or this space within the building going to attract and retain employees, and then get to that magic word, which is so hard to define, but is, to me, the most important word in space design, which is productivity. Productivity is not talked about a lot because it's hard to measure. You can measure efficiency. I can tell you exactly what it costs to run this building almost to the penny, but I can't tell you how productive your employees are until I'm going to study that. So shift number one was from finance to HR. Shift number two, which happened post-COVID, is shift from HR to the C-suite. I mean, real estate is now front of mind to the most senior executives in the company, where it used to be this secondary function, because they now realize, well, why do we have all this real estate if there's nobody here? And so I think that's actually, over the long term, I think a very good thing. I think it's a very healthy thing for our business that the function moved from finance, which was really looking at the efficiency of space, to the C-suite. And again, I'm not trying to denigrate the finance function, but I'm saying it's more focused on efficiency than the CEO is. The CEO is more focused on productivity. So I think the change is going to be disruptive in the short term. And the disruption in the short term is there's going to be this tension between efficiency and productivity, because the finance functions say, well, we don't need as much space, so we can save some money. And then the CEO is going to say, well, we need people. Then we need them to work here because they work here for a reason, to be more productive. So I think it's a healthy tension between the two. But I think the fact that we're now leaning more towards people that are looking at it more broadly, more in a productivity sense, very healthy for the space over the long term.
Two-part question. We've seen leaders have a stronger desire to get their people back into spaces than their people. To the productivity point, there was also a lot of research, I'll put that in quotes, that came out during the pandemic that proclaimed there is this incredible increase in productivity when someone's working from a remote environment. I disagree. And I think that the way that they measured productivity was often in emails sent and Zoom meetings had. But I'm interested in your perspective. Where do you think people are most productive? And when you go around the country interviewing business leaders, are you seeing that they have a stronger desire to get their people back? And if so, why?
So I'm going to go back to the beginning and just go back to the academic research on this topic, which goes back decades. So I think everybody says, oh, this is a whole new thing. It's not a new thing. If you look at the studies that are written by Stanford University, which is one of the leaders in labor studies, you look at the studies by Cornell, the School of Industrial Labor Relations, there is a common theme here. Okay, and the common theme is it's not that everybody is more productive in the office. It is certain functions that are more productive in the office because certain functions require a level of collaboration and innovation that are simply impossible to achieve at the same level if everybody's working hybrid. So this is not to denigrate anybody's job on one or another end of the, call it the creative continuum of what people do for a living. But the higher you're going to be in the creative continuum, and creativity isn't just building cool things. It could be in complex finance. It could be in a hedge fund. You're going to want to be together because you're so much better together to create new ideas. And that's the one area anecdotally in the short term you are seeing a fall off with respect to, we've heard from the tech firms that they're seeing less innovation. However, they measure innovation, which I think is a very good proxy for productivity within the tech business. But I think it's fair to address what many employees are saying is that I need quiet space. And I don't like the hour and a half commute, which is wasted time. And I have a more balanced life. Well, I went to a presentation 10 years ago by I think it was the COO of LinkedIn is who it was. And he says, there's no such thing as work-life balance. This was 10 years ago. And I happened to be here in Chicago. He said there's work-life harmony. And what he said 10 years ago, which I resonated with me, was that he will get to the office after he drops his kids off at school. He'll be in the office from 10 till 3. Then he'll go to the kids' game. Then he'll have dinner with the kids. And then he'll work from 7 o'clock till 11 o'clock at night. That's harmony, right? That is a very healthy work day if you think about it. So I think I absolutely agree with many of these employees that, yeah, there's a better structure of the traditional workday that includes more home time. But I don't think that's the case all the time, and I certainly don't believe that's the case for folks that are at the more creative end of the spectrum. I'll just cite one study. This happens to be a Stanford study. It has recently been updated, which contradicts a little bit of what I'm saying, but the original study I still think is seminal in the space. And this came out in around 2010, and they had studied, it happened to be a Chinese company, and they gave workers the option of working from home or coming back to the office. This was in the telecommuting days. Remember that? Telecommuting. I'm using air quotes for people on air. And what the study found was, at the punchline of the study was that when the study was over, and people had the choice that, well, you could continue to work from home or you can come back to the office. Over 2/3 of the people that were working from home wanted to come back to the office. Why? It wasn't just for some of the soft factors that people talk about, communication skills, networking skills, and other skills that are hard to get from afar. It was actually a psychological factor. It was loneliness.
Isolation.
It was a factor as well. So once again, one size does not fit all. I'm not denigrating any employee's choice on hybrid or work from home. I'm not saying it's because you have power and employers don't. I'm not saying any of those things. What I am saying is black and white. We're all better off if we have a more productive economy, macro. We're all better off if we have productive, well-run companies. And I say this, and this is where it gets controversial, if you're in a well-run, productive company, I think you'll have a tendency to be happier than if you're in a poorly run company, which obviously doesn't have a great future. I think that to the extent there's disagreement on this point, the people that agree on this point, those companies will do better over the long term than those that have a different point of view.
Yeah, and I think you're right with the creative firms. We've had a couple large ad agencies. We've got another one coming in today, and they're definitely seeing the value of in-person collaboration. What's interesting is your background in the legal space. We're also seeing a lot of in-person, at least the trend to in-person in the legal sector, and I think a lot of it has to do with development. It's hard to get it's hard to get on-the-job training or in-person mentorship when it's a planned remote call all the time. And so and we see that in the broker space too, right? Where you match a senior person with an associate. How much of a factor is that in any sort of a intentional drive back to being in person.
So if I can shamelessly plug my podcast, on the podcast about 4 months ago, we had the one of the senior partners at Oric, which is a major law firm, and we talked about the issue of getting young associates back to the office, and we talked about exactly this factor, which is, to use an old-fashioned term, it's an apprenticeship. I mean, that is what they used to call it in days of yore, when you had a senior craftsperson and a junior craftsperson. It's no different in the law. You have a senior craftsperson, you have a junior craftsperson. And the junior craftsperson is better off being with the senior craftsperson. And so you need to find ways to get that junior craftsperson back into the office, not because they need to be there, it's because they want to be there. And you know who wants to be there? Somebody who has aspiration to be that senior craftsperson one day down the road. But the law firms, actually, from my understanding, they're struggling more than some other industries, even though objectively I'm completely in agreement with you, George, about this, how people are better off in this. But again, you still have this, and I don't want to use this in a pejorative way, you still have this labor management shakeout, shuffle, whatever you want to call it, and you're seeing that in the law firm space, maybe disproportionately. But I would say that other places like ad agencies, where you're creating a product, I mean, you are literally creating something that never existed before, that is bespoke. By the way, a funny story about that. Apropos of the whole bowl season, and I'm wearing my Michigan shirt here. Have you been following the whole Pop-Tarts bowl thing? So Pop-Tarts, by the way, I'm a big fan of Pop-Tarts, and just letting you know. But in any event, so Pop-Tarts, they had a mascot that was like a anamorphic, I forget what they told him, but a living Pop-Tart, walking with sneakers or something. And then they threw the Pop-Tart at the end of the bowl game into a fake toaster oven, and then out comes this edible Pop-Tart. So they're eating the mascot. Okay, it sounds like that's the most ridiculous idea I ever heard. But you know what it is? It's one of the most creative ideas I've heard in a long time. Yeah, maybe it gets a little edgy. Eating the mascot sounds a little off. But that's the kind of creativity that can come when you're together. Somebody says, you know what, we're going to go with this. And we're going to go with this because we're together. It's a little edgy, and it works.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some examples. You've seen a lot of workplaces. You've talked to a lot of leaders.
Yes.
What are some of the favorite things you've seen? I mean, you can stick on the topic of getting people back into the office and innovation and productivity, because I do think your perspective on all your traveling and all the different places you get access to, I think it's unique. So I'm interested.
It's somewhat unique in the sense that I'm one of the few people in the business that heavily covers both the investor side of the business and the occupier side of the business. So, as you know, I met with Franco, your CEO at Hayworth, a year ago, went to the Hayworth workplace. And when I went to Hayworth's workplace in Michigan, I insisted on going to the manufacturing side. And I went there, and I saw how it was made. And I did that with a company in San Diego recently, where they make lasers. And I was like, I got to see how this stuff is made. Now, I couldn't get as close to the lasers as I could to the furniture at Hayworth, but nevertheless, you could see how, rather than having the manufacturing site in 20 miles away and the offices and these things were connected.
Yep.
And there's a reason they were connected, because the creative people that are inventing the laser or they're inventing the furniture want to see it being made. They want to see it being tested. And it's a lot easier to see it being made and tested if it's in the same place, right? You get so I would say that anybody that invents something or is in the hard goods business, something that is physical, putting the manufacturing and the office together, absolutely the way to go in terms of creating the best products. If you're not in a hard good business, and frankly, most companies in the United States are not in that business anymore. We've moved from more of a manufacturing economy to more of an information economy. Even though manufacturing is making a comeback, it's never going to supplant the information economy. That's the workplace I think we really need to focus in on. And again, you need to start from what industry are we talking about, and then you say, okay, now let's assume we're in the information business, and there's a wide swath there, and from tech to finance to law as a whole. It's not black and white there either, but nevertheless, let's say we're in information business. Do you know what the number one amenity is in an office? other people. Other people is the number one amenity.
Oh, yeah.
How do you get other people there? So some of the things I'm going to say here are unconventional, right? I think the conventional wisdom, and you can look at the list, and we have lists of open air space, food, sometimes beer and wine offerings, sometimes a full bar. I've seen that too. Okay, this is where it becomes unconventional. So I think the key thing that people need to, there are two key things people need to think about. One is that the study of workspace and labor is deep, it's long, and it goes back 100 years, and you'll be doing yourself a favor if you look at some of the older studies on this stuff, because when you're dealing with workplace, when you're dealing with productivity, you're really dealing with a psychological, the psychological impact on the employee. And is either going to have a positive psychological impact, which means they're probably going to be more productive, or is it going to have a negative psychological impact, which means they're either going to be less productive or they're going to quit, right? And that's really the high cost there. So with that as a thing, now here's the second thing. The first thing is look back, then look forward, and look forward post-pandemic, because from a office and a workplace standpoint, COVID was like a meteor hitting the earth. That's how serious it was. And the only historic example I might be able to say is analogous is World War II. And it was analogous because, again, not perfectly analogous, but the best I can come up with is because during World War II, people materially changed their behavior. And it wasn't just people going off to war and women entering the workforce. That was a very positive side note to World War II. Rosie the Riveter, right? That was a big thing. But the other thing was that people learned to live with less. There was scarcity. If you take a look at the old cars from that era, and some of them still exist, they have wooden bumpers. And they have wooden bumpers because the chrome that was normally used was being used for war. So they had to change their way of life. And when they came out of it, you know what happened? There was a huge surge in demand for everything. And because people had been living in a cave for 3 years, more or less, and that caused massive inflation. Sound familiar?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, and then what happened eventually, it tempered once people got past that initial period of euphoria, or what I now call FOMO, fear of missing out, or what I now love to call YOLO, you only live once, right? Those are the main things. So I'm sort of dancing until I get to my main answer here. But the main answer is this. So you can go to the traditional list of open air, food offerings, but I think what you really, really need to think about is how do you make this workplace not just distinct, but superior to being at home. And the key is getting other people back. So it's like a chicken and an egg thing. So I'll give you a couple things. One of them is clear blasphemy, but the other one, not quite as much. So I was with a big occupier the other day, and one of the things that they're giving their employees is subsidized parking in the building, because it happens to be in a city that unfortunately is dealing with a crime issue, and people don't want to walk a block or two to the office. That's not that controversial. This is the one that's controversial. They said that they are giving some of their senior executives their traditional demise offices back in exchange for agreeing to come to the office 3 or 4 days a week. Why? Because the number one amenity is other people being in the office, and the senior executive is going to draw the junior people back, not because they necessarily need to, because they want to, because everybody wants FaceTime with the senior person. It sounds hierarchical, and some of it is hierarchical. And I'll give you the one area that, again, may be controversial, but this is what was said. It was that, I got this office. I'm a 30-year-old professional, and I like having kids in my pictures of my kids in the office, and quote unquote, I earned it. Okay, this was said to my face, and I was like, I could ignore that and just say open office is better and deal with it, or I could say, has there been a material shift here that we need to take into consideration? And that, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. What I'm saying is you have to think differently post-COVID than you did pre-COVID, and all of the things that you thought were gospel before that should change. So I'll give you another one. One of our subsidiaries is a company called Industrious, and we've been fortunate to have Jamie Hidari, who's the CEO, on my show many times, and he's very thoughtful about how he designs his new industrial space. And by the way, I just passed one right here in the West Loop here in Chicago. He says that what he's finding now post-COVID is that there's far greater demand for conference space than there was before. And he's like, well, why? Well, this is why. You can't get a conference room at home.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's different. It's a superior environment to get certain types of work done. It is distinct. So we could go out there today, and this is, by the way, a beautiful showroom. And your company goes by Boss?
BOS.
BOS.
Yep.
Okay, so I like Boss, but we'll call it BOS. You're the boss.
Maybe we'll change.
I'm the Bruce Springsteen fan.
Yeah,
By the way,
yeah.
Bruce Springsteen does not like being called the boss. Did you know
No,
that?
I did not.
Yeah, so there was this big thing. He's the boss. He's I don't like being called the boss. Like, hey, you're not the boss anymore, but you're still the boss. So if we were to take your beautiful showroom space, which is right outside this studio, and make it look like the nicest house environment imaginable. And I've been fortunate because I've taped my podcast in some very fancy homes. I know what that looks like, right? It's not mine. I do the best I can, but some of the clients. That's not the best workplace. It's just not. Because if it just looks like a cool home environment, it's not what is superior. Even if maybe a superior home environment to your own, it's not superior for getting work done. It's not drawing me there. What draws me there is something that I don't have this at home.
Yeah.
It's gonna make it. I'll give you one other thing, and this is, maybe this is the blasphemy portion of today's show. I did a presentation recently in Los Angeles. It was on a Friday afternoon in the summer. And you're like, oh man, downtown LA, Friday afternoon, summer, you probably did that presentation alone, right? No, this is why. It's because, and this is where the blasphemy comes in, we intentionally decided not to put it on Zoom. It was use it or lose it, fear of missing out, and we had a full house. And it was a 2.5 hour presentation, downtown LA, our downtown LA office. And so those are some things that people need to decide. Say, is that fair? I don't know, but I'm just telling you that's what was done there and it worked.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. First of all, a place is nothing without people. The place could be perfect, but without people in it, it's not worth anything. The best way to get people back is to get leadership back, because that's the one thing you definitely can't get at your house is your boss, or your boss's boss, or your future career path, and the ladder up. So I think one of the things that you just said is incentivize leadership to come back or mandate them. Now, the thing you're going to always lose there is the flexibility and that some of that harmony that is work-life, right? But I think where we've seen leaders struggle is in policies, and how much of it's the carrot or the stick, and how do those policies encourage people to come together at the right time? Because certain things that we've seen not work are policies where people show up at random times and they're not getting that in-person connection, or not with the right people that matter to them. And so you could have the best technology, you could have the best office design, you could have the best conference room, but without the people there, the right people there, then it seems to flutter out or fail. It's like the cold. Everyone loves cold brew, not everyone, but people love it. But it's not enough to get someone to make a commute. So I think that's why it's been so challenging. It's because each company and each team, even within the company, has a bit of a different right answer.
I remember when I was both a young banker and when I was a young lawyer, that Monday morning was when you settled the score for what was going to go down that week, right? You kind of went through your pipeline and who's doing what on this, what's the status, Monday morning. Seems reasonable to me, given the fact that the rest of the week is when you're supposed to execute on that plan, right? But now, if you take a look at the actual data, here comes a non-surprise. Mondays and Fridays are the 2 days that are least likely to get people back in the office. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Wednesday might be a full house. Thursday slows down, and Friday, crickets. There's something wrong with that, right? There should be, say, okay, I can see the Friday thing. I get it. The Monday thing I don't get. The Monday thing is, if you're running a business, and believe me, I am not Peter Drucker, but I think if Peter Drucker were sitting in this meeting, he's like, if you don't start your business on Monday, why are you in business, right? And it needs to be like a real jump start. You shouldn't just like, I'll get there by Tuesday.
End of the week, yeah.
No, this is a business that's designed to be a business. And the business is designed to be profitable. It's designed to be productive. And let's start it off right. But here's the thing, and this is where it becomes psychological. I remember saying, I've said this 100 times, now I'm going to say it 101. Do I need another financial analyst on this team? I was like, nope. You need a psychologist because the psychologist is going to be your best friend when it comes to what are going to be the implications of this decision on your target customer, your target client, your target employee, and really analyze it from that way and then execute. Now, here's one, again, I'm not trying to be like the blasphemy guy on this show. Often, too often, I believe, because productivity is so hard to measure, we use proxies for that. And the proxy we use is a survey, and the proxy item that everybody points to first is the happiness factor. I'm happy. And say, oh, they're happy, they're going to be more productive. Okay, well, and I'm like, well, I'm not so sure. Now, I think that the happiness factor does matter when it comes to attraction and retention. Okay, I think there's a closer link there. But I think, and again, I'm not saying we need to be tough, this is management versus labor. That's not what I'm saying. But there needs to be more than just, I'm happy, to be the measure of success of your workplace design.
I think about the Steve Jobs documentary and all the crying that happened at Apple. That wasn't just pure happiness, but that was heightened innovation and success. Does CBRE have a psychologist?
I don't believe that we do. So this is not knocking my own company. What we are is extraordinarily thoughtful on these issues. We have a tremendous workplace team that I'm sure uses VOS's materials all the time. Georgia Collin leads our consulting effort. Lenny Bedoyan, who's a guy you should meet, terrific guy, he's actually an architect by training, design stuff. So I would say that I'm not aware if we have a psychologist, but I don't think there's any company that's more thoughtful about workplace design that I've seen. And also, I mean, part of my job is I'm not the king of all knowledge. But I am the skeptic. I probably speak to more clients than anybody on both sides of the house. And when I see something that goes against the grain, I'll confront people with that. I say, this is what I'm seeing. And I will tell you, there was a movement for years. It's like, oh, if you say it's not this design, we can't say that. I'm like, we need to say the truth. We need to say what we see. We need to say what is in the best interest of our client, even if it goes against some of the traditional thinking.
You've talked about on a number of your recent episodes is disruption in the tech space. Are you preparing or forecasting or planning for any sort of disruption around AI? I know there was a question about that on your forecast 2024 show, but from a commercial real estate perspective or what you're talking to your clients about, is there anything in the short term that you're preparing for?
So that's a very controversial topic, and it's controversial for both macro and micro reasons. The macro reason is everybody's afraid we're going to get to the singularity and the Terminator is going to take us all out, along with the Pop-Tarts somewhere down the road. But the micro thing is, well, what do you do with this stuff today? And so let's assume for the moment I'm selling this building, and I need a paragraph on why this particular block on River North is got X amount of foot traffic for the next, on an average Tuesday. Go to Mr. or Ms. AI and say, I'm on so-and-so block of business. Write me a paragraph about how much foot traffic and why there's foot traffic on this thing on Tuesday. Right? I'm sure some kind of reasonable paragraph will spit out of ChatGPT or whatever, but that's controversial. I'll tell you why. Because there's what I consider the single most important amenity of all. If you don't have this amenity, I don't even know why you're in business. Okay, and I fight on this point all the time, and it's called trust. You need to build a culture of trust of your employees. If you don't trust your employees, what are we doing here, right? What are we doing here? You have to have that culture. And so I am at odds with some corporate decisions on this policy because I think the concern about ChatGPT and AI from a practical build this pitch book standpoint is that people will just take that paragraph and stick it in the pitch book and say, I'm done, right? No! Our people are better than that.
Yeah.
They won't do that, right? Will there be an outlier here and there that'll do it? Yes, there will be, okay? And it's a risk I would be prepared to take. We need to be able to empower our people, trust our people, to use these devices to make them more dare I say it, doggone it, I'm going to say it, productive. And use the lower level work, which is some of the boilerplate language, modify it as appropriate. You cannot just cut and paste it in there. That's where it becomes a problem. Modify it so that it helps you moving forward. So I think that if used appropriately, AI is a wonderful tool, because what it'll do is it'll allow people to do higher level functions. And a higher level function is actually cutting the deal to sell this building, to lease this space, to have that cup of coffee with the potential client or customer across the street, while the amount of time, effort, energy to build that pitch book, which goes from 50 hours to 15 hours, how is that a bad thing if you don't use it in a lazy fashion? Right? The concern is some people will use it in a lazy fashion and it will diminish our brand and all that kind of stuff. And I get that, right? But they could do that today anyways. They could plagiarize. I mean, I can think of 100 negative things they could do. But we need to create a culture of trust, create a culture of we have the highest quality product. You know, it's a carrot versus a stick. Either you're not permitted to do it, or if you're going to do it, you know, we trust you with doing it. I'm more in the former. Some people are more in the latter. I'm not sure where the right answer is. It's probably some level of gray in between, but that's how I see AI.
With your role as an analyst and the research that you do, and CBRE is known for the data data you're able to collect, is there an opportunity there? Because one of the challenges with data is if there's a lot of it, it's hard to turn it into tangible actions or insights or a playbook. So I know that's something that you do. Are you looking at ways that you can use powerful computing to make accurate predictions faster, given all the data you have access to?
So let me tell you a funny story. So do you remember, George, during COVID, there was that period from, say, March till June, there was no professional sports on TV. And we're all locked in our houses, don't know what to do. You know what was on TV? Horse racing. Do you know how many horse races I had watched prior to March of 2020?
Less than
0. Never. Not once. And I started watching it because it was the only thing on TV. I'm like, what's the attraction of this stuff? Right? I really didn't care much for the horse racing, the race itself. I didn't care that much about the gambling. But then I said, well, I got nothing else to do, so let's go dig into why this is attractive. And I started reading the statistics on horse racing. And what I found was horse racing has the best, the deepest data set of any data set I've ever seen anywhere. Why? Because it goes back 150 years. It's deep, and people pay money to create a data point. There's no better data than somebody buys the data. Like, essentially, it's real data. This is not like survey data. This is, oh, I think this horse would. No, you put $1 on that horse, right? That's the best thinking you could possibly have. Okay, fast forward to what I learned from that experience. In addition to having the best data I've ever seen, they also have hundreds of PhD level articles written on analyzing horse racing, betting, patterns, things like that. And I'm not saying I read them all, but I read a lot of them. And they all came up with the same basic conclusion. The same basic conclusion is that the favorite is always materially overbet, and the underdog is always materially underbet. Why? Psychological factors. And where does that apply? Real estate. Because what is materially overbid? The most popular asset classes. What's materially underbid? The less popular submarket. I mean, office, okay, newsflash, office isn't popular today, right? But there's tremendous opportunities in office in the best submarkets, best buildings. I mean, you can't get deals like this. Is intergenerationally incredible opportunities right now if you can get product at fair market value. So back to your question about data and predictive. So there's certain things that data can do precisely or almost precisely today. So we just taped an episode yesterday with our head of property management, Emma Buckland, and a company that we're now affiliated with called DeepKey. And DeepKey, what they do is they measure the sustainability of a building. And measuring sustainability of a building used to be something where you'd measure it when you built the building and then see you later. No, that's not the case anymore. You have to measure it over time, the amount of emissions, the amount of energy use, and I guess the next stage there will be measuring embedded carbon versus just emitted carbon. Because the most efficient thing in the world is to reuse it rather than knock it down and build another one, right? So where am I going with this? When it comes to data, the data that measures the performance of an individual asset isn't perfect, but it's close to it, right? It's getting to that point of diminishing returns. Where the data is, I wouldn't go so far as say is terrible, but I would say is light years from being good, is in the predictive ability to say this is a good investment opportunity, to predict the future of that particular asset class, predict the future of that particular subject. Now, it's not imperfect, it's actually quite good. I mean, industrial and multifamily, which were the two most popular asset classes, did outperform all other asset classes until recently. Right now, multifamily is struggling right now, not necessarily fundamentally, but from a capital markets perspective. So even the best trends can get disrupted by, what did I say? Finance and labor. And what disrupted multifamily wasn't demand, it was finance that disrupted the multifamily business. So it's a long, fancy way of saying this. That is the, holy grail is probably too strong a word, but it's the holy grail that doesn't exist yet of having really good predictive models on real estate investment opportunities. Because look at all the smart people that own office buildings in the best submarkets, and what are they thinking today? So even these best predictive models fall on their face when there is a secular shift in the market. And the secular shift was led by COVID, followed by the rise of inflation. But over the long term, finance and labor lead the way. I think the best predictive tool we have on the value of real estate is labor, is the flow of labor. The reason why we're sitting here today is actually, it comes full circle. Getting people here is probably the most predictive single tool for all forms of real estate. I mean, you know quite well. I mean, I have my cell phone right there. You can measure where I've been.
Yeah.
You can measure all different forms of traffic patterns, but you can also look at demographically. 1,200 people move to the state of Florida every day. Things like this matter over the long term, but again, it's one tool. You then need to find those sub-markets, like the random New Albany sub-market I just gave you a moment ago. 20 years ago, who thought New Albany was going to be anything but farmland? The farmers, right? Anybody. But then they found the new CHIPS Act, put Intel there, and now it's this budding sub-market outside of Columbus. So these are the things that you need to look at the mega trends, and real estate will be a derivative rather than the reverse. You could build whatever you consider to be the best of any of the real estate asset types. You put it in a secondary area, it's not going to work.
I love how the consistent tie-in is that labor focus. Very interesting. Can we talk about Chicago for 1 minute?
Sure.
Your Chicago in Focus video that CBRE produced, and you were the narrator of it. It said that there's an importance of industry, infrastructure, and interconnection when you look at a city like Chicago, or any city really. And there was then a bunch of statistics about Chicago that seemed very favorable. But living here, we know that there's a lot of challenges as well. So I'm interested, as it relates to this market and your perspective. I originally was going to ask you, is the CRE market here a concern or an opportunity? I'm hypothesizing the answer is both, but in what ways?
So I like to start with funny stories. So I may have mentioned my son was a great baseball player as a kid, so we traveled all over the U.S. to different ballparks, and we went to some major league ballparks, Miley. So you ever wonder why Chicago and Cincinnati, two cities that were about the same size 150 years ago, why Chicago is now 30 times the size of Cincinnati? You ever wonder? Because of one decision. One. Cincinnati bet on riverboats. Chicago bet on trains. And it was the better bet. That's why Cincinnati Stadium is named Riverfront Stadium. By the way, I love Cincinnati. It's a city on the rise. My friends at Fifth Third are there. It's a great city. But that is the fundamental reason for one city growing more rapidly than another. So, but it comes back to today, right? This interconnectivity thing. So the greatest attributes of Chicago is in its manageable density, meaning this. It has tens of millions of people in the MSA, depending upon how you measure it. Right? Not as big as New York, but it's, I think, the third or fourth largest city after Los Angeles. But it has the train system to get these great volume of people in, like New York does. And that is something that cannot be discounted, because a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to go to Austin, Texas, right? Well, Austin's a great market. Austin's got 1 million people, right? Chicago's got, tens of millions of people, and that's a huge competitive advantage. The other huge competitive advantage of Chicago is, and no, I'm not talking about this because Michigan just won the national championship.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm saying this, that the Big Ten is surrounding Chicago. And what an enormous competitive advantage. And I say that not just for football terms. The Big Ten, and I'm proud to say, one of my good friends, Donald Sheets, just took over the real estate program at Ohio State, and I taught there the other day. They are materially improving the quality of the education environment. These are top-tier schools, and Northwestern's always been a top-tier school, and sitting right here in Chicago. So infrastructure, education, then you have the cultural elements, you have the great restaurants, you have the theater scene. So all of these things are irreplaceable. Okay, so let's start with the good news. That's the irreplaceable stuff. The bad news is what you suggested. Look, people are concerned about the cost of doing business here. And the cost of doing business here is the taxation issue. There's been concerns about crime here. No, listen, I know what all the issues are. And I like the way you framed it. It's both a challenge and an opportunity. Over the long term, Chicago, in the right submarkets and the right asset classes, is going to be just fine. This has been a great market for industrial. It's been a great market for retail. And some of the other asset classes, office and hotel and CBD areas, they're struggling everywhere. They're not just struggling in Chicago. Okay, so you say, oh, it's just us. No, it's not. It's a secular thing. And so the way that people should be looking at Chicago is a lot of people are afraid of it. You know what I say? Good. Now there's opportunity for you, because you can get great multifamily at a 100 basis point discount that you can get it in another market. You can get office for a song right now. These things are selling, if they sell at all, at intergenerationally low prices. Industrial, given the trains that I mentioned before, given its central location, unbelievable competitive advantages here. And in terms of some of the other issues, look, I had a presentation with your head of tax assessment here, Fritz Kagi. By the way, very nice guy, very smart guy, finance guy. And even though there's some people are upset that he's raising taxes in certain areas, he is on your side. He is on Chicago's side. Because prior to him getting here, there was a much more of a, not random's the wrong word, it was just a mishmash of what are you paying tax. He gave certainty to an uncertain system. Did it raise taxes in some places in certain areas in the short term? Yeah, it did. But you know what? Gave you certainty. And that to me is creating a foundation upon which you could now accurately underwrite future growth. So the biggest opportunity of Chicago are all those macro factors I mentioned. The micro factor, number one, is a lot of people are afraid of it. And some of the factors that people point to, say, oh, high taxes, the pension fund situation, all that stuff. I think that you have very good leadership here in Chicago. I know my office just met with your new mayor and had a very productive meeting talking about work from home, among other things. So I think Chicago is a city that has its challenges like a lot of other places do, but there are a few cities that have more opportunity than Chicago, given all of its great macro factors.
Well said. I love that answer. We'll finish off with just a couple quick personal questions. Something you're looking forward to in the next 12 months.
Well, Michigan just won the national title, and I now hope the Baltimore Ravens win the Super Bowl. So that is top of mind. But from a business perspective, what I'm really looking forward to is interest rates being on a steady march downward. It's been the sticky wicket, so to speak, and I don't even play cricket. That has been really challenging our industry. And I think that if you see, and our house forecast is 4 or 5 rate cuts this year, maybe more, but if that's the basic forecast, you're going to start to see transaction volume materially increase and really take off in 25. I think you're going to start to see it at the end of this year. But we said that last year. And why were we wrong last year? We were wrong last year because even though the cracks in the armor showed up in March, the Fed and the FDIC intervened in such a strong fashion that the downturn never happened, right? So maybe it worked out in the long run for a soft landing for the economy, but it delayed the recovery of real estate, right? So there are a few industries that are more interest rate sensitive than real estate. Tech's another one, by the way. People say, well, why is tech so interest rate sensitive? It's sensitive because tech, you value these companies on a growth basis, and you have a small raise in the cost of debt, and it blows up your discounted cash flow model for all you folks out there on Excel right now. And so, in any event, we need the cost of interest to come down materially. We need to have some greater clarity into what is going to be the resolution in the office sector, because that is gumming up the works as well. So if you're a bank, you've got a bunch of office loans, you don't know what it's worth, or you can't offload them in a reasonable fashion. It's going to gum up the works even if the interest rates come down. So those are the two things I'm looking forward to. I certainly think the first one's going to happen, that the interest rates are going to come down, and it's going to create more opportunity, more liquidity. As far as the resolution in the office sector, that's a story that's still being written. I mean, I can give you the optimistic case. I mean, the optimistic case is that people have gotten the memo, and they are now understanding the nature and severity of the problem, and the problem really is everybody's problem. It's not just rich landlords' problems. It's everybody's problem, because here in Chicago, office landlords pay over $2 billion a year in property taxes. Well, guess what? That's going to get cut a lot in the next year, and what does that do to social services? It's everybody's problem. So the good news is people are aware of it, but I hope when I speak to folks, I say, well, when you go to these politicians, what do you ask for? And say, oh, we need a tax break, we need money, we need this. I was like, okay, you need that. But this is my recommendation when you speak to politicians. You say, you keep your money. Give me my time. And say, reduce the permitting process to convert from office into multifamily from 3 plus or minus years to 6 months. And that will jumpstart the market. And so we work with a large architectural firm, which I'm sure you work with as well, Gensler, and they use a case study. And the case study they use, I'll use it right here on the air, is Calgary, Canada. It's just a random city which did exactly that, which reduced its permitting time from years to like 6 months, and it jump-started the market. Another positive trend is happening here in Florida, where they were able to create a law that materially reduces the permitting time if you convert office into multifamily, if you have a certain element of affordable housing there. And I'm a big affordable housing advocate. And so there are things that can be done which aren't monetary per se, they are time. Time is the key. If we can underwrite time with certainty, that will be the most realistic and fastest way out of the office challenges.
I think that's a great place to finish. I mean, you've given us incredible perspective, solutions, things that we can do, and this conversation has been everything I thought it would be. So thank you so much, Spencer. It's been wonderful.
Well, thank you, George Lucas, and I should tell you that I'm a big fan of Star Wars.
And I should tell our listeners that if you haven't checked out the Weekly Take, give it a listen. It's phenomenal. And you'll get a lot more Spencer there. So thanks again, Spencer.
Thank you, George.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to rate our show. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the Work Inspired podcast so that you don't miss any of the incredible guests we have planned for upcoming episodes. We'll continue to find the best and brightest minds in business so that you can learn, grow, and succeed, and so that we can all work inspired. Work Inspired is brought to you by BOS, a leader in commercial working environments and a Hayworth best-in-class dealership. Experience our 360 approach and discover the team, tools, and techniques required to navigate the complexity of your next workspace at BOS.com. If you have ideas, feedback, or would like to be featured on our show, please email podcast@BOS.com. Thank you for listening. This has been a Workspace digital production. If you're interested in launching a podcast at your organization, please email info@workspace.digital for a free consultation.